Hello everyone, my name is Mark Faithful and I'm delighted to welcome you to our special webinar this morning, Location Analysis. Understanding location analysis is crucial for businesses looking to identify the best sites for their operations, whether that's retail outlets, logistics hubs, or dark stores and services. So we're going to look at the concept behind location analysis, then hear about some of the ways Asda is applying the strategy for this 2U operation. And at the end, I'll be putting a few questions to our two speakers. So the whole session should take about 40 minutes. You can ask questions via the chat function, and in addition, the session will be available on demand because there are lots of really fascinating slides, and so you'll have a chance later on to have a look at those at your own pace. With that, I'm delighted to welcome Flo Broderick, Chief Marketing Officer at CARTO, and Neil Drake, Senior Manager, Parcel Service and Format Development at Asda. So starting with you, Flo, I wonder if you could just introduce yourself briefly.
Absolutely. So I'm based here in the UK working for CARTO. We're a location intelligence software company with a presence predominantly in North America and Europe, but serving a wide range of CPG, retail, telco, out-of-home customers around the globe. Excited to be here today with one of our customers, Asda, and really excited to have a conversation around the topic of retail specifically today.
Thanks, Flo. And Neil, I know you're a man that wears many hats at Asda. I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit about your role within the organisation.
Yeah, of course, Mark. So in my role, I work in the TU team. So we look after parcels for Asda. We offer a pick-up and drop-off service. So my kind of primary role is looking after the end-to-end service delivery of that, and then looking at the kind of format development. So the kit, the equipment we use, and as we are looking to grow, starting to look at how we operate beyond the kind of four walls of Asda. Added to that, I look after the sort of delivery, the home delivery contracts with our couriers that work with our Judge.com business.
Fantastic, thanks, Neil. Flo, just to sort of set the scene and to explain a little bit about what we really mean by location analysis, I wonder if I could invite you to start the session.
Yeah, absolutely. And location analysis, you can hear it in different ways. Some people say geospatial analytics, some say spatial analytics, some even talk about GIS, geographic information systems. But really, location analysis is turning different types of spatial data into sometimes a type of insights for a business. Everything happens somewhere, particularly because all of us carry a phone around everywhere nowadays. And that means that we have a lot of insight on where people interact with different brick and mortar assets. So in the context of a telecoms company, for example, it could be where should we roll out 4G services? Or for an out-of-home company, it could be where should we put billboards for a specific campaign that's looking to target women between the age of 20 and 30. And in the case of retail, it's quite a wide range of use cases, which we're going to talk about today. And I think the retail one's so interesting because of how quickly consumer behavior changes. So if we think about business intelligence, which is probably something you hear more commonly in businesses nowadays, that could be asking the question of where. So where do my loyalty card holders live and shop? Which, yeah, that's a business intelligence question. You probably, if you work in a large retail company, are used to seeing a dashboard with some charts, some pie charts, some graphs, maybe a little map in the corner showing this is where our loyalty card holders live and shop. But if you want to go a lot further, we talk about going beyond the where to actually start understanding the why. So why is the average basket spend for loyalty card holders in certain areas so much higher than other areas in Q1 2022? That's not just a business intelligence question, that's actually a location intelligence question. And the most cutting edge organizations out there are going much further than visualizing points on a map and actually creating spatial models to understand those behaviors and to be able to feed insights very quickly back to people in teams like Neil's, in operations, in marketing, in real estate, etc. So this is what we consider to be location analysis. And I think often in the retail industry, people think location analysis is just location planning, i.e. I am McDonald's, where shall I put the next 10 McDonald's in the southwest of the UK, or where should I close the next 10 McDonald's in the southwest of the UK? But actually it's so much more because of how the consumer is changing. And there are some really great examples visualized here. So, of course, location planning for stores and quick service restaurants, cafes, etc. is a top one. But another one now is increasingly the logistics questions. So for lockers or for last mile delivery to customers, or we've got a massive boom in the whole quick commerce space. So many of us in the pandemic started to order a lot more from platforms like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Glovo, etc. So there's a load of questions about how do you serve territories for that? Where do you have more demand on those apps? Where do you have more riders? Where are your ghost kitchens? Where are your dark stores? Terms that we didn't even mention 3 or 4 years ago are suddenly on the cards. You know, CARTO is actually is a real leader in the geospatial space. Anyone who's used a CARTO might be familiar with the fact that their optimization of last mile is pretty advanced, the way they do it in 1 hour windows, and you know, and that's really set expectations for some customers. Also the out of home case, which I mentioned before, in a new world where people work in different places, live in different places to where they did before the pandemic, understanding where audiences are in relation to billboards is another one that retailers are asking us a lot. And then finally, and this has been very closely tied to COVID, has been indoor mapping. So we work with some very large shopping mall companies across Europe to understand how people move around indoor spaces as well. So how does that change when suddenly there's a peak in COVID cases right now? Or how do people interact with different areas of the mall? Can I charge more to have sites on one side of the mall because I know that the foot traffic is 40% higher because we've just put in a new Nando's, which we know people in this area of the country love. So many location questions, and actually until you maybe work in the location analytics space, you don't realize how many of them there are. It really gets you thinking through a completely different lens about business problems. And the big thing that we've seen is that old data no longer does the trick. There are a lot of retailers out there who are just using census data, and the census was, you know, we've done a census more recently and a lot of the results are still coming through, but there are some companies who are still making decisions based off census data from 8 years ago, 6 years ago, depending on the country. And in a time where every graph changed in the past 2 years, that doesn't do the trick. You know, if you think about tourism, it used to be very predictable what percentage of the UK population went on holiday to Spain in the summer, went on holiday to Greece, and you'd be pretty sure about where they went in those countries. But suddenly the staycation happened. Suddenly people weren't even taking holiday because they were waiting for COVID to end and delaying and accruing holiday days. And so understanding the where of things through more geospatial data it's just really peaked in the past 2 years because the whole scenario has changed. And I thought I would just show this with an example. I mean, I don't know if any of you walked around central London in the middle of a lockdown. I was actually amazed by how back to normal things were in Soho a couple of weeks ago. The streets are even busier than pre-pandemic, although that suddenly seems to be changing because, again, we're having a little peak in cases. But that is interesting to see in a photo, but what does that look like on a map? So one of our biggest data partners is actually MasterCard, and they provide a really interesting transaction insights. They don't give pound or dollar values, but they basically give indices to help understand what's the economic pulse of an area at a certain time, like what happens in food and drink spending in central London before and after lockdown. So what you're seeing here is that index visualized. Like actually in lockdown, there were some areas where people were actually going and spending a lot of money because the only thing that people could do was go and have a coffee and walk around a park. So you can see here, you've got Hyde Park, Regent's Park and Primrose Hill captured there, probably areas where people were desperate to go to green space, to grab a coffee, maybe grab a sandwich, eat it on a bench in a park because that's the only thing they could do. But then as soon as people were out of that scenario in September 2021, people were suddenly out and about everywhere, going out for meals, desperate for some activity. And so looking at these trends on a map, I think is always very interesting. And in terms of the different types of data that you can think about, we just looked at financial data, transaction data, and Neil's going to go into a little bit about the kinds of data that they're using at Asda for their specific business problem. But you could also be looking at foot traffic. Human mobility is one of the most common ones. Housing data to understand what's happening with housing prices and how that's been affected by the work from home transition, the stamp duty holiday that we saw. Road traffic is an interesting one. Lots of people are talking now about how Thursday is the new Friday because everybody works from home on a Friday and everybody goes to have a pint on a Thursday evening now. So looking at what does that mean for traffic is very interesting. Points of interest, so everyone talks about the death of the high street and actually looking at that over time to understand how there are less or more points of interest in suburban areas versus high streets. You know, Pret a Manger is a great example of a retailer who said they're going much less urban and going for some less kind of really central urban locations and going more suburban. Behavioural data, social data, I'll show an example of that in a later example, and then weather data, because of course that massively affects everything. And as we've seen in the UK this week with lovely sunshine, suddenly there's ice cream vans everywhere, everyone's out on the streets, and there's very different consumer behaviour. So these are just some examples. I think it's great to hear about these, not from the perspective of somebody in the location analytics space, but somebody actually on the front line dealing with some of these problems. So I'll hand over to you, Neil, to talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with location analysis.
Thanks very much, Flo. And so just, if you maybe flick on the next slide, that would be great. And the next one. I'll just give you a quick potted history of sort of, the business unit I work in, TU, where we've come from and what it is we do. And then we'll go into some of the bits we're working on and how we're using data to try and look at expand what we currently do. So really our journey, there's a bit there about Asda and how they moved into the kind of .com markets, click and collect being launched back in 2010 for George.com. But back in sort of 2013, there was a view that we had to sort of transform how we were doing that. So that ended up with the development of end-to-end tracking capability, systematic, landscape change for our click and collect operation for non-food. What that allowed us to do was, in essence, not just move parcels and offer a pick up and drop off service for our George.com business, but also to offer that out there to the market. So we have 140 different retailers who work with us and offer either collections for their customers or returns or both. So we've established quite a healthy base of customers that work with us. If you want to flick onto the next slide, please, Flo, thank you. So at the moment, that's operated out of the kind of four walls of the Asda estate, if you like. So 639 locations across the country offering this service. We've invested heavily in making sure we've got a real good, strong service in our stores, including a load of automation, returns drop boxes to try and speed up the kind of collection and the returns processes for a customer. But what we absolutely see is that 639 locations is good, but there's a number of other people in the market that have significantly more footprint than us. The insight we've carried out with customers in our store estate says the two key drivers are about convenience and location, and that's how customer is deciding where they want to collect their parcel from or where they want to return it from. So for us, we can see that the number of locations, if we want to continue to grow the business, the TU business unit, we may have to do something a little bit different. So we've been looking at how can we take our service and move it beyond the four walls of Asda, so we can try and compete more in the market and take more share, more parcel volume. There's a couple of trials and a few examples where we've started to move beyond the Asda estate. So we've a returns drop box in Manchester University Students' Union. We've just installed this week in a halls of residence linked to Manchester University. A new concept external drop box that we've developed, and we've also, our new owners, the EG Group, we've put some parcel offering in a few of their shops to see how that works outside the kind of core Asda estate. So there's lots of opportunities where we see we can go a little bit further, and really, kind of where we're aspiring for, we haven't got a sort of fixed number, but if we were saying 5,000 locations, that would be a real strong aspiration for us. It's quite a bit of the way to get there. So I suppose what that means is we've then got to start looking at, well, how do we get there? Where are these locations going to be? Because as there's a fairly steady estate, there may not be that many loads of new locations coming on in the next sort of 2 to 5 years. So we've got to do something different, and really that's where the data came in, and that's we started talking to CARTO and working with them probably about 12 months ago. And trying to look at the data that was available to help us make some of these decisions. So some of the first ones that we've looked at, the universities, the EG locations that we've put parcel services into, we've started to use data to try and understand what do we think is going to happen. I think it's fair to say we've got a good understanding of what goes on in our core estate. We understand how your kind of core Asda shopper, who they are, how they interact, and we know how that kind of works. What's all new to us is as we look at these new locations, We know demographically a student would typically be somebody that would shop online, have strong returns. So we think that demographically a halls of residence, a university should work. But actually what we've wanted to do is sort of layer on that and get richer data and more data. So where Flo talked about some of the data sets that are available, things like mobility, so seeing where people are coming past and moving past these locations, that's absolutely key for us, because it was more than just where does somebody live. Convenience means different things to different people, depending on what sort of mission they're on. So for us, it's all been about taking the data that's available, but getting more up-to-date, more sort of real-time data, and using that to make informed decisions. And that allows us to look at the sites and think if we think they'll be viable. But then within what we do, it's looking at investment decisions. We have a suite of options that allow us to move from a simple handheld terminal right through to fairly heavy automation and kit that comes with a much higher level of investment. So we need a bit of confidence that we think it's going to achieve the volumes to do that. The data helps give us that confidence to do that. Other bits we look at is using the mobility piece. We have some of these locations may be fairly close to an Asda estate. So how do we look at, is there a degree of cannibalization? How does that, what impact does that have on the kind of broader or the core estate? Because, those people that are going into Asda and spending some money at the moment, we don't necessarily want to stop them doing that. So it's finding that sweet spot and understanding the mobility piece and impacts on investment, impacts on cannibalization of our store estate have been real big things we've wanted to get and understand. And I think for me, it's the piece that this isn't a kind of one-off piece of work. It becomes sort of iterative. What we need to do is become better, and we need to continue to work with this data so we continue to learn. And as we have a site, we refine our thinking. We look, we take the models, we take the understanding of what we've done and use that again and keep it alive and keep using this data, because there's a one-off hit. It's great, but as Flo mentioned, the world can change very quickly. Who knows, what's around the next corner. But there may be other challenges or other things which come along, which again evolve the way in which we're working. There's a huge drive at the moment on kind of environmental factors. A number of towns and cities starting to put in or looking at putting in sort of charging in city centres. Again, how does that change that final mile, that click and collect type offer, and how does that change the mobility of how people are moving around? So for us, it's really important that we continue to stay close to the data and use that to help us make sort of informed decisions in what we do in the future, where we go, and how we invest in that. And I think there's maybe just one more slide, Flo, which just shows, some of the stuff where we're looking at some of the core data around how many people live within sort of a set location, a set distance, where we're looking at a number of sites and trying to work out the points of interest, the competition locally. So again, we can factor all those in to say where we think it will drive volume, where there's higher competition, less mobility, maybe a slightly lower volume, and therefore it's not that we don't want to go into the site, but we maybe make a slightly different investment decision and go in with a slightly cheaper alternative or route to market. So lots of different ways that we can play with it and use the data. So we think it will really help us make good decisions going forward and help us on that journey of growth.
And Neil,
hand back to you.
I was going to ask a quick question, Neil. So when obviously you've got this solution here that provides these data points, how's that typically used by you and your team? Are you actually interacting with the solution, sending screenshots to each other on an email? What does it normally look like?
Yeah, we'll generally we'll have somebody that will be taking a site and looking at where we're going. So somebody will do that interaction to look at a location, the competition. We'll feed that in, and then as a team we'll be working through that, because there are different people that are looking at the kind of what's the right kit, what's the right design, what's the right operating model to look there. So different teams, whether that's the finance team, whether that's the kind of operational team. So yeah, we've got a couple of people that will do the kind of core going in, getting the data, getting the stuff, and then working cross-functionally with the different sort of colleagues in the team who have to be involved in making the financial or operational decisions. And again, using that data and sort of a pack of a presentation to help that conversation.
Brilliant, awesome. Well, thanks for sharing the story. We're going to move on to another case study now, which is again a very topical one for anybody in the retail and grocery industry, which is it's less of a site selection example and more of a point of sale selection example, I would say. So massive growth in the vegan plant-based category. I'm sure you're all faced with this when you go to the supermarket now, the abundance of products out there. And we're actually going to look at a live demo. So similarly to the solution that we just showed screenshots from, I'm going to do a quick live demo here. But we're looking at an example of a CPG firm who's launching new products in the plant-based category. In this case, we're going to look at an example in the US. So if I just jump across here, what we're looking at here is, so imagine I'm working in CPG. I'm the head of expansions for a new category and shopper insights. And here what I'm looking at is points of sale. And what I want to understand is, for this new plant-based product, we're going to do a massive marketing campaign to make a splash. And it's like a fake chicken, essentially, fake chicken product. And we're looking to do pop-ups so that we can get customer insights, people can try it, some cool pop-ups in a store. So if I know, for example, that my target, my most successful segment for vegan products tends to be young urban singles who are adulting for the first time. That's an age group who really enjoy that. So actually, we know that those people typically tweet and do Instagram posts if they have, this is called geosocial data, which is available through our platform. Recently engaged, focused, they talk about adulting. Their median income in the US is this. This is what the kind of family makeup looks like. So here I can see that these are the points of sale where those are the dominant kind of profiles. So if we zoom in and we say, okay, well, where do I already have my product? Because they'll be, we already have a relationship with those points of sale. I also know that this won't work in a petrol station. It won't work in a convenience store because they're too small. So really, it needs to be a grocery store, ideally. And so we can start to zoom in on where these points of sale are. And then we can also have a look at, like, how have these stores performed in the past for particular categories. So in this case, we're looking at the actual weekly revenue for specific types of cereal bars. We know that these same cereal bars tend to have a brand affinity with also plant-based products. So in this case, we can see that the weekly revenue for Nature's Valley cereal bars is this much and that much for Larabar. And then I can also just toggle on and see, okay, but what do these segments look like in relation to the point of sale? So it seems that wealthy suburban families are also very present in that area, which is also can be a good fit for plant-based. And that can change, you know, the dominant segment changes very quickly. And, you know, that's something, if you walk around London, is very apparent, right? You can suddenly see very changing demographics from one street to another. And so understanding this on the map is really important. So just get rid of that layer there, have a look at this points of sale. I can also see, okay, well, maybe I know that if I'm going to do this, I probably want to do this where it's a very urban, high density, more foot traffic, and then the people who are trying to push the product on these pop-ups will have the greatest chance of being able to get good customer insights. So we can zoom in and see a little bit more about these options, speak to the operations team that are launching this campaign, and actually work out which points of sale are the best ones to go for. So this is really interesting to understand potential things for a pop-up. It's also interesting to understand where you don't have points of sale, where perhaps your competitor have more points of sale and you're missing. But also it's very interesting to understand from the perspective of catchment areas. So I'm going back here to seeing all of my points of sale, but here we're looking at estimated weekly revenue in grocery. So basically what this solution is doing is making an assumption that we know that if we got our product into these stores, this is how much we would sell per week. So it's a predictive algorithm that we have here, which uses human mobility, the geosocial data, the demographics, points of interest. And so I can actually also see catchment areas. So if I click on this point of sale, we can see that there's an estimation that this store will have approximately 6.2K visits a week. From consumers. This is all extrapolated up, of course, to be representative of the full population. And I can also see, okay, well, in the context of this grocery store, it's a Kroger's, I can see this is actually the Larabar performs much better than the Nature's Valley bar, which probably tells me something about the kinds of products that are most popular at this location. And then I can also see, like, what's the catchment area? Do people come from a wider catchment area to this supermarket, or are they coming from much closer? So really, really helpful insights for somebody in CPG and retail. There's a lot of overlap in the use cases between CPG and retail. I guess the fundamental difference is that the retailers own the real estate, whereas the CPG companies are trying to understand from a point of sale perspective and pushing that insight to their salespeople and merchandising people. So that's a little bit about the CPG example, and that's an example from the US, which is anonymized because obviously the customer ones we wouldn't show live on a webinar. But this is some results from a CPG customer of ours that have used this as a point of sale strategy. And what they've seen when they do these pop-ups in a guided way is that they get 31% more social posts in products in areas using this geosocial insight. And they also see that once they use this to guide their point of sale strategy, they see a 6% lift in sales where areas where their sales team started using this tool versus other states where they weren't using it. So, measuring the ROI of data is really important because, okay, we need more data, we need more customer insight, but how do you measure the investment in that? And I think this is a really good example of the results. And then the final case study, which Neil touched on, talking about dark stores and how that's kind of happening a lot in the industry now, is looking at where would you pick sites for dark stores. So for those of you based in the UK, brands like Getir, Gorillas, who are offering 15-minute delivery to the home rather than the kind of order online model with the larger supermarkets. Imagine you're trying to decide where to put these dark stores. So these are like mini supermarkets that consumers can't go into, which is why they look like this. And you obviously need to put them within in a location where a 15-minute delivery range is feasible. And so it's a very specific type of real estate that you would look at. And so to have a look at a demo for this one, I can show you a quick story. So in this case, again, we're looking at an example from the US. Imagine you're this expansion manager. You need to find 5 ideal sites for those grocery stores. You know what your customer market looks like, so you obviously want to use those demographics, those geosocial data sets that we saw in the CPG demo. But yes, we've been handed 7 locations by the real estate team. We need to pick which are the best 5. Which ones are we going to put our money on? So these are the 7 potential sites here. We know that each location's got a 1-mile delivery radius around it because that's what we need to be able to deliver in 15 minutes on bikes or mopeds. And in this case, we're actually doing this analysis straight out of Snowflake. A lot of our customers use Google Cloud, Snowflake, and we integrate directly with those cloud data warehouses, as well as Amazon Redshift. And what we can do is bring in data from our data observatory, our data catalog, which Neil alluded to earlier, on demographics, those consumer segments, income, population density, purchasing patterns, and housing units. So obviously you're not going to go and do this in industrial areas. You're going to have to do this where there's a much more abundance of residential property. And so what we do is we create a spatial index so that the expansion manager can quickly see which might be suitable locations across the city. And the darker cells have more of the attributes for a successful location. So it seems like a dead cert that this is going to go well in this area of Seattle. But if they did start to look at locations in kind of more suburban areas of the city, they would quickly be able to see which are more appropriate areas. And in this case, the geosocial segments, they have some kind of overlap with people who like outdoor adventure, people into hops and brews, so people like brewing their own beer or like IPAs and stuff like that. So bringing in some really interesting qualitative customer insights to use this in geospatial algorithms and using spatial indexes. So super interesting. Then we enrich the data even further and provide like more market granular insights. So here we're also looking at more consumer segment data. So sky high, exclusive exurbs, so like suburbs were the most exclusive suburbs of a city, and understanding like what does that 1-mile radius from that location look like in comparison, then understanding which are those dominant segments in each location. So it gives you just an idea of what can be achieved here. And then once you've done that, of course, you're not going to go and put dark stores where you haven't had many app signups. You need to go where you've probably invested your marketing dollars to be able to attract those people to use the app. And so here what we do is we layer on those app signups, and this analysis is called the location set covering problem. And it's used, for example, so many of our customers are actually in the public sector as well, like where should we put fire stations, where should we put hospitals? So it's very, very similar techniques that you would use in different industries even. So yes, here we can see that we've layered on the app signups here, which are the little blue dots, and you can see them in the relation to those potential locations, seed locations as we call them in this demo. So it helps you again see, okay, well, this one might be in a great location in terms of the segmentation of the people around it. We've barely got any app signups there, so we'd have to spend a lot of marketing money to be able to do well with that dark store. And then the final one, so here we can see we've actually come to our final conclusion. We can see quite clearly that if we go for the 5 ones, so the orange ones, these are the best ones to make sure that we would cover 82% of our current app signups. So potentially has the best ROI. And this is just a very quick and dirty example of an analysis. You know, it's very similar to the one that Neil's spoken about. But yeah, hopefully an interesting example that brings it to life. So yes, I will stop there. Slides back on.
Fantastic, thank you, Flo. The first thing I have to say is that to do live demo and a live webinar, you must have ice in your veins. That all went very well, pleased to say.
Yes, lots of tests.
One of the first things that strikes me, and maybe I'll start with you, Flo, if that's okay, is that, you know, I think you've done a very good job there of concisely showing how much different data can be looked at. For people that are participating in this for the first time, you know, where do you start? Because obviously there's lots of data out there, but how do you determine, depending on who you are, what you need to know?
I think one of the most important things we see with customers is like starting in a certain area and seeing how it works. So, you know, Neil mentioned Manchester, for example, like this, they're starting in a very specific area. Let's work out how the data can support our decisions in one area before we try and do this nationwide. Or we have some retailers come to us and want to do this in multiple countries. And there are some really big nuances in data in different countries. You know, human mobility data, and for example, in Germany is much more complicated because of privacy legislation. You know, all of the human mobility data is obviously anonymized and aggregated. But it's very different as to what data you can get in different places. So I think it's important to start small and then grow up from there. And you need to have buy-in from lots of different departments. This can't just be something that stays in a geospatial team or an analytics team. Like, it needs to reach people like Neil, who are very, very close to the business problem, and who know very clearly what success looks like if the data is good. But we see a very wide range of maturities around this in companies. Some have like really, they're doing very complex analysis with huge data science teams, but then sometimes that's in a silo because actually they're not feeding that back to different more commercially facing departments within the company. So yeah, I think it's about starting small and making sure that they've got the right data and tools. You know, you can't do this stuff on Excel and Tableau. That doesn't do the trick. You need to bring in the right data and bring in the right tools.
No, absolutely. I think we've already found out that the world runs on Excel. I mean, it's perhaps time to move on. Neil, I mean, really, yes, following on from that, obviously you touched on it in terms of what you've been doing so far, but you know, so for you, how did you set about identifying and trying to define the sort of information that would be useful for you to decide what you did need?
Yeah, it was an interesting one because I think we knew demographically who our kind of core customer was and the people that use the service. We'd done that through our sort of own sort of insights. And I think, if I'm really honest, it was a bit of an education, you know, spending time with some of the guys from CARTO for us to understand what data, the richness of some of the data that was out there. So for us, I think, you know, we knew that we wanted to understand points of interest, where competition was, number of kind of chimney pots, you know, how many people live locally. There was some of that kind of core demographic data. And I think actually it kind of opened our eyes a little bit to the richness of the whole piece around mobility, about how many people are going past that location, when are they going past the location. That was the bit that I think we probably went into it not fully appreciating we could get our hands on. So we knew the kind of core demographic that we wanted to understand. I think then with the, you know, there's a whole host of stuff that we were able to layer on top of that, which we were helped, you know, educated on.
And Flo, I mean, again, sort of following on from what Neil's saying there, when you look at choosing the data sets, how do you translate what you're learning and evaluate? And also, I mean, I guess that, not all data sets are made equal. So depending on what the actual requirement is, clearly certain things will have much greater weighting. I mean, an example you gave about plant-based, clearly their demographics might be a real core, because clearly, veganism does tend to be centered around certain socioeconomic groups. Whereas something else might be, as Neil was saying, might be about footfall, which would be a much broader church of people, going to work or university or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's really important to show the depth of the breadth of data that's available out there. We actually, so as an example with the geosocial one, we have a full catalogue for all of this data, and we explore this with customers versus like who's their ICP, their ideal customer profile. And so, for example, if they mention vegan, you can very quickly show like what are the segments, how are they created. So actually one of the top ones for veganism, maybe unsurprisingly, is hipsters. So you can actually jump into the data, see the rows, and see a sample. So here we can see a sample map of that data in London. But then also, a data person will want to see, okay, but what do I get? What variables do I get? How's this index calculated? How are you sourcing that data, from how many platforms, etc. And that goes way beyond. In the UK, for example, you've got all of these different types of data, and we go through them with customers to understand what can be most useful and what's not useful at all, exploring them. And that's available to explore on our website if anyone's interested in having a browse. But we're always bringing on new data partners, and there's always amazing new use cases that we see with this data that you perhaps might not have imagined until you hear someone's business problem.
I did read the other day that hipsters have all got old, so we need to find a new term for them, actually. So maybe I'll set you that task, your data analysis, and looking for an alternative term to adulting, which I'm very uncomfortable about. But otherwise, excellent presentation. Neil, so yeah, I mean, having gone through that process with CARTO, and again, obviously you touched on some of the things you're experimenting with, and fascinating, I think, in what you're doing with Asda. What decision did you make based on the analysis? Were there particular things that really stood out that maybe you wouldn't have done without that kind of background?
Yeah, I think it said when in the slides that there was a bit around looking at an area and giving us a decent feel for how it's going to perform. But the key bit for us is, we have different investment decisions that we can make, so we can go in with a kind of lighter touch offer and service, right through to kind of full-on automation technology, which comes with a much heavier price tag. So that data giving us the confidence and yeah, the richness of it has certainly given us more confidence to say we think this will work here and we should push on and really make it work and be a bit bolder with some of the decisions that we're making. So it's hopefully going to back up what we're looking to do and support our kind of investment decisions as we go forward.
Final question for both of you, and perhaps Neil, I'll stick with you just for this one. Based on what you have done, I know it's early days, but how are you going to, or where do you sort of see the assessment in terms of the impact and success or otherwise of what you've been doing?
So I think the assessment in terms of where we're at, let's say some of the sites are literally just going live as we speak, but the first couple, what I would say is that the analysis we did on the sites is certainly backed up by the volume, backs up the volumes that we're getting through. So we've done a few of these first sites with the EG group, the Asda on the Move sites, and the data that came through, the ones that said that we were going to get more volume, we're getting more volume from them. So I think for us, what it does is give a little bit of confidence in, that the data is pointing us in the right direction. As I said, for us, it's got to be a journey rather than just a single point of interaction. So we'll continue to learn and evolve. Some of the locations we're going, we will find new things or see things that maybe work really well or don't work as well. And it's then how we plug that back into the data and work with that to understand why we think that's the case and learn and either do more of it or stop it or do less of it. So yeah, for us, it's a bit of a journey. It's certainly, we think at the moment the stuff that's coming through is backing up what the data was telling us.
And Flo, on a more general terms, the same question to you. How do you work with the clients to you know, once you've made that assessment and they've made a decision, to then assess whether it worked out the way it should have done?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the use case. Some of these use cases are much longer term, right? Some of our dark store customers have only just put dark stores in, so assessing success is a bit tricky at this point. And with brick and mortar decisions around stores, you know, they're also longer term decisions. Some of the use cases are much easier to calculate the ROI for the customer. A great example would be in logistics and last mile delivery. So DPD, for example, is a very big customer of ours, and they're using our platform for last mile optimization. And so it's basically like using CARTO for constraint-based optimization based on how do we reduce the number of routes, how do we reduce the amount of fleet required so that we have a more sustainable fleet. And it takes into consider things like weather, road closures, the maturity of the driver. Like if a driver that's been with the company for 15 years knows their way around much better than a driver that's only been with them for a year, which is a massive challenge right now because of the amount of churn in the driver industry. And so using CARTO, they're basically making much shorter routes with more stops and more spatially optimized routes, which has a massive impact in terms of fuel savings, the maintenance required on vehicles, the cost per drop off, the cost per pickup. And that's very easy to measure because you make those recommendations on routes, you try them for a week or a month, and you can very quickly see the results. But yes, the retail site selection one's a little bit of a longer one, but we typically look at like what was foot traffic at certain locations before you were using data versus then, how's the basket spend improved because you're actually putting stores in the locations where the demographics are more appropriate. So there are plenty of ways to measure.
That's fascinating. I think what's interesting is just, you know, the constant evolution of all of this as well. And, you know, and then we have these big seismic events being thrown in as well as seeing different consumer behavior. So much going on. I feel like we could probably have done a webinar on just one of those aspects and filled up the time very easily. But we've tried obviously to cover a huge amount of territory in a short space of time. And sadly, that time has now got away from us. So as I said, this session will be available to view on demand. So you'll be able to listen back and look at some of the slides and demonstrations as well. And also you can get in touch directly with Flo. I know if you've got any further queries. That just leaves me with a very simple task of thanking both Flo and Neil for their thoughts and for, you know, explaining a lot of the complexities that's going on at the moment in terms of working out, you know, how to optimize retail into all its various aspects. And, you know, thank you as ever for all of you joining in today. I hope you found it worthwhile. So thanks very much, guys.
Thanks so much, Mark. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks. Cheers.